Welcome to this episode of Let's Talk Premises. My name's Richard.
And my name is Romy. So there's a statutory requirement landing in September that Ofsted will inspect for, and whether your school meets it doesn't depend on your policy, it depends on your building. We're talking about the Kcsie 2026 draft guidance, specifically what it asks of your physical estate. Richard, most of the conversation around this has been a pastoral one. Why isn't that the full picture?
So Kcsie 2026, what it does is it introduces statutory provisions around toilet, changing and shower facilities. So separate facilities for boys and girls aged 8. So that's like a hard requirement, like no exceptions. Then from 11, it's the same, but for changing rooms and showers.
And those two are non-negotiable, but there is a third element as well, isn't there?
Yeah, there is. So if a pupil doesn't wish to use the facility designated for their biological sex, the guidance says that schools should consider whether an alternative individual facility can be provided, but obviously only where it doesn't compromise the single sex provision. And that third one isn't a mandate to provide something, but there's now a duty to properly consider and then document whether you can or not.
And that consideration is still a premises question. Someone has to physically look at the building to answer it. You can't do it sat at a desk. And all of this is Ofsted inspectable from September. So it does have a hard deadline attached.
Yeah, no, exactly. And which is why the framing matters, So like, I don't know, most schools that I understand are approaching this as a policy question, like who decides, how it's communicated, how it sits alongside existing inclusion approaches. And that conversation is obviously important, but it's incomplete because what the guidance is describing isn't a policy position, it's a physical requirement.
Yeah, and those two conversations just aren't happening together. The policy side gets picked up by the head teacher, the DSL, the governing body, and the premises side, whether the building can actually deliver what's being asked. That's a whole different conversation with different people entirely.
Yeah. And in a lot of schools, I bet that second conversation hasn't even started yet.
So what does it look like when a building can't meet the requirement? I think people might assume that most schools are fine. Separate toilet, that sounds pretty straightforward.
Yeah, more commonly as than people might assume. So, like older primaries, especially, a single unisex toilet block, open plan, changing provision, facilities that just haven't been meaningfully, reconfigured in decades. They weren't designed with this in mind, Romy. Like that's not like a failing. This just is the reality of the stock.
And the alternative facility, so that third element, that's the one that most buildings probably haven't thought about at all.
That's it. That's where it gets very practical because considering it properly means someone has actually looked at the building, has formed a view, and if that alternative were to be provided, it would be typically, I guess, a self-contained single cubicle, perhaps, somewhere where the pupil can use it privately, separate from the main single sex provision.
And a lot of buildings just simply don't have that space, do they? So the question is whether you could create it with, say, a partition, a repurposed room, perhaps a door change, and whether there's the budget and the time to do that before September.
Yeah, exactly. The duty is to assess whether you could create it, document that assessment, and obviously record the outcome, not to assume the answer is no and then move on. And most building works that need to be in place for September, I would say need to be commissioned, now, like before half term.
Which means if nobody's actually walked the building yet, you're already pretty tight. The discussion has been happening in staff rooms and leadership meetings, but not in the toilet blocks and changing rooms. The estate team often hasn't even been a part of the conversation at all.
Yeah, absolutely.
So practically, what does an SBM or a site manager actually do from here then?
They need to go walk the building, get the guidance in hand, walk the building, like map your toilet and changing provision against the requirements. So aged 8 and over, facilities, they need to be genuinely separate by sex. Then aged 11 and over, same question for changing rooms and showers. And of course, on the third element, could your building provide a self-contained individual facility if a pupil needed one?
And the answer doesn't have to be yes here, does it? But you do have to have asked it, formed a view, and written it down.
Yeah, that's exactly it. So, and if works are needed, they need to get them scoped out right now. And if they're not feasible, that's fine, just document why. But either way, the document trail matters now because Ofsted will be assessing whether a school has considered and therefore responded to the requirement, not just whether the facilities exist.
So the risk isn't only failing to meet the standard, it's failing to be able to prove that you've even looked.
Yeah.
So one takeaway, Richard, for say a head or an SBM, a premises manager that could be listening to this, what is the one thing that they should hold on to from this conversation?
That your policy won't be inspected, it's your building.
Brilliant. I think that's a great place to end it. Thank you everyone for listening to Let's Talk Premises. We will link to the Kcsie 2026 consultation in the show notes. And please don't forget to subscribe to our channel and we will see you next time.